Hello everyone, my name is Yuzhou. Today is my lecture recital. Very excited about that. Back in 2015, when I came to US, I was thinking to study different things, not just classical music. So before I know I'm gonna go to US, I was thinking, oh, maybe jazz is the part of American culture in the music. So I decided to study jazz and discover this genre of music. And when I came to US, I keep to take the private jazz piano lesson until now, because I want to get the ability of the improvisation. That's many great composers in history, they all have this ability. And they do so well in this ability and create many fascinating music. And when I'm doing my master, my piano teacher introduced this guy, Nikolai Kapustin. He's a Russian composer, and he's a fusion of classical and jazz musician and composer. So my peers, they play the composition by Kapustin, and when I hear, I feel like, wow, that's amazing, because that's the sound of classical and jazz get together. It's not just classical music only. And I really like it. But back in time, I was preparing my recital, and I don't have much time to work on it. But I keep that name in mind and check out his composition once in a while. And until now, I get a chance to fully work on his part of composition, and I'm gonna talk to everyone about his composition today. So, his composition is 130 to date. The people find quite astonished that Nikolai Kapustin's music has remained undiscovered. And being composer from 20th to 21st century, there's a large amount of it, 130 compositions to date, including 16 piano sonata, 6 piano concertos, and a set of 24 preludes, and fugue for piano, and also as well as piano quintet and significant number of the other chamber works, and the other compositions for orchestra and big band. Kapustin born in Glovka, Ukraine in 1937, and he died 2 years ago, 2020. He started playing the piano at the age of 7. He went to Moscow Conservatory to study the traditional Russian school of piano playing guided by Alexander Golden-Windsor. And he developed a broad view of capability of music and achieving a technical brilliance. And even though he originally intended to pursue a career as a classical pianist, and he had already started to compose and become increasingly aware of the significance of jazz as a useful crossover form of musical communication. And after graduating in 1961, he formed a jazz quintet, and he toured in all the Moscow back in time. And his composition style became a blend of Western classical and post-classical arts music, much influenced by the modern idiom of jazz and rock. And his music now bridges the world of classical and jazz music in ways. His piano works, which from the bulk of his output, are written in highly pianistic way and lie virtuoso under the fingers. He delights audience who are captivated by his particular stylistic blend of classical construction and jazz idiom, and attracts admiration from the other fusion composer. Kapustin did not have a formal training as a composer in the Moscow Conservatory, and his thoughts about his education were like, quote, Like he said, I didn't want to study with the composition faculty of Moscow Conservatory because I didn't want foreign influence to affect my musical style. And who would appreciate my jazz experience at the time, and I would have been expelled. Because back in time, it was Cold War between the Soviet Union and America. So they are not like each other. Then he would be expelled by school. And during his study at the Moscow Conservatory, Kapustin was also inspired by so much work of French composer Ravel. Ravel's classical jazz music employs many color tones of the chords. There are lots of extension on the chords, 9s, 11s, and 13s, the flat and sharp, and the melody devices of pentatonic, chromatic, and the diatonic. The 24 Preludes, Opus 53, composed by Kapustin, features many of the other composition devices and different music styles such as waltz, ragtime, stride, and bebop and swing. He talks about his composition process, quotes, "For me, the classical part is more important. The jazz style is there to give color, but I don't like jazz form. If you describe them like that, which is why I adopted those forms of classical music," quote close. And he also said, quote, "I was never a jazz musician. I have never attempted to be a genius in jazz pianist, but have to slip into this role for the benefit of my compositions. I'm not interested in improvisation, and what would be a jazz musician be without improvisation? Any improvisation on my part has naturally been noted and has improved during the process, which has allowed to matter," and quote close. In my opinion, the improvisation and the composition, they are very similar. So when you have some idea, you just play around the keyboard or your instrument, but if you don't write it down, that's improvisation. But once you write it down what you play, that becomes part of a composition, and people can read, and people can study. And I've been told by one of the professors before, he said that, "Have you seen my improvisation are the same in each time?" That makes me think a lot, because when you do improvisation, you will forget after what you play. Maybe you only remember one of 3 notes. Back in the Kapustin, he has a different vision from people and another angle to define the music. The result was very successful for him, and he also made a personal style and outputs. And there are 3 parts of the main aspects of evidence the influence of classical music on Kapustin. There are the use of the genre and forms of classical music, and the compositional process and the compositional techniques. The Kapustin wrote many classical genres, such as sonata, concerto, symphony, string quartet, piano trio, suite, rhapsody, prelude and fugue, toccata, etude, and nocturnes. And also, he uses the classical forms such as variations, rondo, binary, and ternary, and more. The composition process of Kapustin is like many classical composers, when he has some ideas and then wrote them down. And when he had a sufficient fragment of the ideas, he will work on the material to improve it and make it perfect. And Kapustin said, that's quote, "Beethoven was a great improviser. He could easily rewrite all his improvisation. Did he do it even once? No, he didn't work on his he didn't work on improvisation, but the notes of a full sketch about what was he thinking by Beethoven. That's called N. And usually the classical music in the beginning, it wasn't possible to recognize that's the material that would become one of the best sonata or classical pieces in history. And the classical composer understood that after many rewrites for the composition, the result will be completely different. And the last evidence, the influence on Kapustin, is the compositional technique. Kapustin's outputs, including thematic transformation, motivic development, and contrapuntal devices. There are many existing manuscripts that shows a more classical approach, the way Kapustin wrote about jazz chord in a classical academic way, and spread out the notes out. The jazz musician will see different. A jazz musician will not like to recognize the chord note by note. They usually see the chord as a symbol. But Kapustin was very careful to decide and check the notes he put in the score, and which shows the relation pointing to the classical approach rather than to jazz. Now the first piece I'm going to introduce to everyone, it is the Variations, Opus 41. And Kapustin composed this variation in 1984 and published 1 year later. And it was a productive year for him because there were 2 or more major works done by him in the same year. Piano Sonata No. 1, Sonata Fantasy, Opus 39, and 8 concert etudes for piano, Opus 40. And the variations are a good example of Kapustin used the form of variation from classical music and applied different compositional devices. Even though the piece doesn't completely follow the traditional variations form to alter the rhythmic theme, the majority of the theme carries on with the jazz idiom by typical blues swing post and syncopated rhythm pattern. Also improves how his compositional techniques fuses both classical and jazz idioms. In the music, the variation is a formal technique where material is repeated in the counterpoint and outer form. The change may involve melody, the rhythm, the harmony, the counterpoint, timbre, orchestration, or any combination of these. In this piece, there are 9 variations in total of this piece. And from the beginning to the end, there's only one slight moment for the rest. The theme of these variations is mostly recognizable and based on the opening solo bass figure in The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky. The Stravinsky borrowed his theme originally from the Lithuanian folk song titled Tu manu sele, and Kapustin followed it. The both Stravinsky and later Kapustin work decorates the grace note to mimic the sound of duki, which is a traditional wind instrument from the Lithuania. The original song translates as "That's a lot of fun." And as you can see, I put the map here. The darker green is the location of the country, Lithuania, in Europe. Now, I would like to play a little bit what's the original sounds like and this composer, how to make the difference on their composition. And in the bottom, I have a music score that shows music line in the key of C. Here's the Strat-Whiskey version of The Rite of the Spring, and composed in 1913, and that's how he used the theme. Now, the Kapustin uses the theme freely, featuring 32nd notes, dotted 8th and 16th notes, triplet, and accent marks, which gives a different style of sound and beat instead of the traditional folk song. And also, the key of the theme often rapid transfer from F minor to D flat minor, A minor, and G flat minor in 4 measures at the very beginning. In here, that's the Kapustin version. And it frequently changed the key center at the beginning. That's the theme. Then he started variations. Now I will play this variation from the top to the end. Now the next piece is Impromptu, Opus 66, number 2. That's my favorite one in here so far, the 3 of them today. And this Impromptu is a musical composition with the character of improvisation. The both 3 for a solo instrument in a free form, such as piano. And a Czech composer, Borisek, pianist and organist, he also, the first records used the impromptu as the musical form and term, and occurred in 1917 in a magazine called Musikalisk. And his impromptu numbers, Opus 7, were published in 1822. And when this character piece genre was born during the period of the Romantic era, everyone loved it. And the weight of sound and compositional technique, that's why we can see many great composers had done work on it, including famous composers. Chopin composed 4 impromptus together with Fantasia Impromptu. Schubert published 2 sets for 4 impromptus for piano, Opus 90 and 142. And Robert Schumann wrote Impromptu in Opus 5, and Liszt, Scriabin, and the list goes on. And in 1991, Kapustin composed 3 impromptus, so combined in this Opus 66. And these 3 impromptus, he fused the classical music genre with jazz, harmony, and rhythm, and contrasting idea between the opening and the middle section. The number 2 from this opus is a D minor, but it doesn't have a key signature on the score to indicate. The piece marked with allegro meccanitate, that means played mechanically like a machine. That even though it's impromptu, we will analyze by form on purpose for easy understanding. The second impromptu is organized into 3 sections, A, B, A prime. And it has a very traditional tonal sound in the key of D minor. The first section, A, includes the fast and syncopated rhythm that contrasts with the slower, stylistic swing of middle section B. And Kapustin put double bar line to indicate section A and B. So here's the section A that starts with a repetitive 16 notes pattern, or only as accent at the second and the 4th beat, while the left hand plays accompaniment of downbeat and an upbeat rhythm at an octave of D with a grace note. The repeat sign is put at a measure 2 to set up the vibe of the piece for the audience. From measure 3, the impromptu set up the rhythmic groove coordinated by both hands. That's the beginning of this piece in here. And Kapustin started to be lyrical from measure 20, marked with espressivo. And this passage applied all 16 notes on the right hand and less accompaniment on the left hand. But there's a very important middle line in a voicing, and the melody line needs to be played clear and keep the right hand, left hand all together and running. The or red circle I mark here, it's all the inner voicing. The section B starts in the measure 45. That's by ascending walking bass line with grace note. Yes. There are many articulation marked in this section, such as staccatissimo, staccato, accent, and tenuto. And Kapustin put legato on the left hand because he wants the double bass walking sound smooth. Also, Kapustin puts an accent at the last beat of triplet and 16 notes. And some of them are next to each other, so it's very important to count the beat and to hold it together. And the left-hand pattern, from the measure 60 to 67, Kapustin uses the same motion again from measure 12 to 13 to recapitulate the theme. So the same pattern complement left hand that shows earlier in the beginning and shows it later at the end. The last section, A prime, is slightly different from the beginning, but you can recognize that it returns to original A section. And Kapustin uses the pattern of the beginning to twist them a few times to make it slightly different. It's easy to get lost because it's confusing. All the notes in here are like a maze. Eventually, the piece finished at an upbeat at the first beat with pianissimo. And Kapustin used a bebop line when I started this piece. In here, I marked with the red line. Bebop line is a jazz lick that played by many musicians when they solo, and it's the same pattern, but you can make it in different keys usually. Now I'll play this impromptu from the top to the end, and you can think it as a form of A, B, A prime. No, there's the last. Now there's a last piece. It's the 8th Concert Etude, Opus 40, number 1. And since the 19th century, the etude has served as a significant music genre in piano repertoire, providing works in which one or more specific technique skill were used in order to strengthen an aspect of keyboard technique. The rise of the etudes in early 19th century was a direct outcome of a newfound attraction of virtuosity. Like Chopin etudes, Opus 10 and 25 list transcendental and Debussy etudes. A result that leads to a musical scene became widespread with method and instruction manuals that were designed for performer to achieve virtuoso status. In the 19th century, music and culture became more unsubtle as a direct result. The rise of new transportation, technology, and communication gave the way to new artistic thoughts and musical innovations. And many composers began to write etudes with atonal, bitonal, and polytonal, and polyrhythmic, and serious texture, which keeps to push the boundary and elevate the demand of genre of etude. Kapustin is a composer as a notable figure in the later part of the 20th century to set a new chain, the piano etude genre. The 8th Concert Etude, Opus 40, presents the pianist with a new challenge as a virtuoso in the 20th century. Each etude is a set confronts the pianist with different technical challenges in variation, fascinating ways. And I choose the number one for this lecture. And the first etude, titled Prelude, which shows the introductory showpiece that begins the etude set. And this etude features a variety of harmony and rhythmic jazz elements. In tonal C major, the first etude is based on two distinct themes. There's a short development of the themes, and then the previously material from the theme comes back again later. The structure itself is very similar to a sonata form. And at the beginning of this etude, the first theme is very straightforward character, but it is with an ambiguity tonal center, which is the score shows the C major, but since the beginning, it starts in the B flat dominant 7 chord. And the second theme starts from measure 13 in the C major, and it follows by a descending bass line C, B flat, A flat, and repeats once. And here's Kapustin employs a tritone substitute from the D flat, from A flat, D flat to C, back in C, in a jazz harmony way from measure 14 to 15. I circled the bass note on here is the bass line. And in the classical music, that's called Neapolitan chords. It's mostly the first inversion. And Kapustin puts a very interesting 3 same notes to connect the left-hand accompaniment. And back to the anaphrasing. So in jazz era, the augmented stakes and the Neapolitan chords usually consider the substitution chords for the other chord tone, the other chord. Kapustin used the D flat back to C in substitute of the G dominant 7 chord because they share the same chord tone. I have a example by here. It's the Equinox by John Coltrane. In the head, the last 4 bar, the John Coltrane using the substitution to back to the 5 chord. I will play a little bit to show what I mean here. In the bar 9 here, John Coltrane using the A7, and back to the 5 chords of the tonic. This piece is in the C sharp minor, so that's augmented 6 in a classical way to explain. There are 3 types of augmented 6. There are Italian, French, and German. And this one is the French one because you have the second note. You have the second of the 2 of the key of C sharp minor. And another example I put in here is one of sonata of Beethoven's Opus 2 and number 3. And in the second theme, and Beethoven used an augmented 6 to back to the 5 chords. I will show a little bit what I mean here. This is the second theme start. To the D, that's another augmented 6 Beethoven using here. That's a German 6 he using because it's yes, in the jazz way to think, it's all using the 1, 3, 5, 7 in here back to the 5 chords of D. Now I'm going to play the first one, the number 1 of this opus. It's called Prelude, this etude. everyone to come out today to share this lecture recital with me, and I really appreciate it. And I hope everyone can get a little bit interested in Kapustin today. And for me, I think that's one of the ways I need to work on, be like him one day. And yeah, I need to thank you everyone who joined today with me, and thank you my dad and mom, and haven't seen them for a while because of COVID-19, and I couldn't make it to home to see them for a very long time, and they always support me so much, and really love them, even though they are not being here. But I wish we can meet next year. And very big thank you to my professor, Dr. Adela Heian Park. She's an amazing pianist, and she gave me a lot of help on this project. And thank you to Dr. James Wayne, and another amazing pianist. And we have a piano ensemble, and I have lots of guidance by him. And thank you, Adam Benjamin, the jazz professor here at UNR. He's a great jazz pianist, and I took a lesson with him last semester, and it's pretty fun, and I learned a lot. And thank you to Dr. Louis Niebuhr, our program director at UNR Music Department, and he is a very interesting professor. I really want to talk to him because I have so many paperwork I need to work with him of my records. And for my last committee, Dr. Valentin Diacunu, he's professor outside the music department. He's a very smart guy in the math department. He's a professor in the UNR for a long time. And thanks for stage management, James and Rachel and P to make it happen today for my lecture recital. And they continue to take care of the camera for me today. And yeah. Thank you for all friends coming to support me, and even though they are not coming today. And yeah, thank you all.